Look around you right now, wherever you are. Your home, your car, the waiting room you're sitting in, the break room at work. Look at the infrastructure around you. The lights running on a grid built in the 1960s. The road you drove in on that hasn't been properly resurfaced since the last administration. The water pipe under your street that the city knows is failing and has budgeted to replace in 2031. The hospital 40 minutes away that closed its overnight ER 18 months ago because it couldn't staff it. Everything looks functional. Everything is technically running. But if you've lived in America for more than 40 years, you have a feeling you can't quite articulate. A low-frequency hum of something being wrong. Not the dramatic wrong of a crisis you can point to. The quieter wrong of things being a little slower, a little harder, a little more expensive, a little less reliable than they used to be, and nobody in charge seeming to treat that as an emergency worth the word. That feeling is not anxiety. That feeling is data. And today, we are going to name what it's measuring. Because something is breaking in the American system. Not one thing, several things, simultaneously, in ways that interact with each other and compound in ways that no single news cycle captures, because no single news cycle is designed to show you the whole picture. The whole picture is this video. Let's start with the infrastructure number that should be the centerpiece of every conversation about American competitiveness, and almost never is. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives the United States infrastructure a C- grade in its most recent report card. Not a D, not an F, a C-, which sounds like barely passing until you understand what a C- means in the specific language of civil engineering assessment. It means the infrastructure is deteriorating faster than it is being repaired. It means the backlog of deferred maintenance is growing, not shrinking. It means the gap between what exists and what would be needed to meet current demand, not future demand, current demand, is widening every year. The ASCE estimates the total infrastructure investment gap at approximately $2.6 trillion over the next 10 years. That is the difference between maintaining what exists and watching it degrade, not building the future, maintaining the present. A 61-year-old civil engineer in Pittsburgh named Thomas Halverson has spent 34 years inspecting bridges, roads, and water systems across western Pennsylvania. He retired last year. He told an engineering trade journal that the single most demoralizing aspect of his career was watching the inspection reports he filed, documenting structural degradation, flagging specific failure risks, recommending repair timelines, sit in municipal and state databases for years without producing action. Not because the officials who received them didn't understand them, because the political cycle is 4 years and the repair timeline is 20, and no elected official gets credit for fixing something that hasn't visibly broken yet. Thomas said he spent 3 decades writing warnings that became histories. The bridge doesn't fail the year the report recommends repair. It fails the year after the repair budget gets cut for the 4th consecutive cycle. The second fracture line runs through a system that Americans interact with more personally and more vulnerably than any infrastructure: healthcare. Between 2010 and 2024, more than 180 rural hospitals in the United States have closed entirely. Another 600 are currently classified as at risk of closure. These are not small facilities serving small populations in places that don't matter. These are the only hospitals within 30, 40, 50 miles for millions of Americans. The facilities that determine whether a heart attack becomes a survivable event or statistic. The closure pattern is not random. It follows the map of Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates, which have been systematically held below the cost of care delivery for rural facilities for over 2 decades. The facilities close not because they are mismanaged, not because the communities they serve have stopped needing them, but because the federal payment formula makes their continued operation mathematically impossible without subsidy. And the subsidy has been declining in real terms for 20 years. A 67-year-old retired nurse in Greenwood, Mississippi, named Dorothy Haynes, worked at the only hospital in her county for 31 years. It closed in 2023. She told a local newspaper that in her final year, the hospital was treating patients in hallways because there wasn't enough staff to open the wings that had the beds. The staff shortage wasn't because people didn't want to work there. It was because the hospital couldn't afford to pay competitive wages, because it was already operating at a structural loss. Dorothy said the hardest part wasn't the closure itself. It was watching the community spend 2 years believing someone in Jackson or Washington would step in and fix it. Nobody did. The closure was announced on a Tuesday. By Friday, the parking lot was empty. When the only hospital closes, the community doesn't get a replacement. It gets a longer drive and a worse outcome. Tell me in the comments, have you personally experienced a situation in the last 5 years where the healthcare infrastructure in your area failed you or someone you know? Not a long wait time. An actual absence of care that should have been there. I want to know what that looked like for you, because the national statistics don't capture the individual weight of it. The third fracture is the one that connects the first two and makes both of them harder to solve. And it is the one that the political conversation is least equipped to address honestly. The United States is experiencing a compounding municipal fiscal crisis that is invisible at the national level because it manifests locally, one city and county budget at a time, in decisions that never make national news, but that are rewriting the social contract of American community life with 1,000 small cuts. Property tax revenues that don't grow as fast as service costs, pension obligations that were made in the 1990s based on investment return assumptions that have not been met, federal grants that covered critical services during COVID and have now expired, leaving programs that communities built around them with no replacement funding, deferred maintenance on everything from water systems to school buildings that compounds interest-free in the form of accelerating physical decay, until the day something fails catastrophically and the cost becomes 10 times what it would have been if it had been addressed on schedule. A 55-year-old city comptroller in a mid-size Ohio city who asked not to be named gave an interview to a municipal finance publication last year. He said that the thing that keeps him awake at night is not a specific crisis on the horizon. It is the math of the ordinary. He said his city's water system loses approximately 30% of treated water to leakage before it reaches customers. They have known this for 11 years. They have the engineering reports. They have the repair plan. The repair plan costs $180 million. His city's entire annual budget for capital projects is $22 million at that rate. The repair plan takes over 8 years just to begin, assuming the system doesn't fail catastrophically first, which, given the pipe age and the leak rate, his engineers have told him is a matter of when, not if. He said the cruelest part of municipal finance is that you can see the failure coming with complete clarity and have no mechanism to prevent it at the pace it requires. The system isn't failing because nobody sees it. It's failing because seeing it and fixing it are two different things, and the gap between them has been growing for 30 years. Now I want to place this moment in its proper historical frame, because what is happening right now has happened before in American history. And the last time it happened, it took a generation to understand what had gone wrong and another generation to partially reverse it. Between roughly 1965 and 1980, the United States went through what historians now call the fiscal crisis of the state, a period in which federal, state, and local governments simultaneously confronted the limits of the post-war infrastructure investment model and responded by deferring maintenance, cutting services, and retreating from public investment across the board. New York City nearly went bankrupt in 1975. Cleveland defaulted on its debt in 1978. Infrastructure across the Northeast and Midwest entered a period of accelerated decay that produced the visual landscape of urban blight that defined the late 1970s and 1980s. The political response to that crisis, accelerated deregulation, reduced public investment, a philosophy that private markets would maintain infrastructure more efficiently than public spending, solved some of the acute fiscal problems. It did not solve the underlying infrastructure deficit. It deferred it again in new forms, under new assumptions, with longer timelines. What we are living through now is the second wave of that deferred reckoning. The water pipes, laid in the 1950s and 1960s, that were supposed to last 50 years have now lasted 65 and 70 and are failing. The bridges built in the 1970s that were inspected and flagged and reflagged and never repaired are now at the end of their engineering lives. The rural hospitals that were built with federal Hilburton funds in the 1950s have been running on reimbursement models that haven't kept pace with costs since the 1990s and are now closing at a rate that would have been called a national emergency in any previous era. This is not a crisis that arrived suddenly. It is a reckoning that was scheduled the day each decision to defer was made. The decisions were made across 6 decades by politicians of both parties at every level of government. The reckoning is now. The thing that makes this moment different from the 1970s fiscal crisis is the rate of compounding. In 1975, New York City's fiscal collapse was visible and acute and produced a political response. Painful, controversial, incomplete, but a response. In 2025, the equivalent crisis is distributed across 1,000 municipalities and rural counties, each one too small to generate national attention, each one making individually rational decisions that produce collectively catastrophic outcomes. There is no single moment of visible collapse that triggers a political response. There is only the slow accumulation of things that don't work quite right, of drives that take a little longer, of weights that stretch a little further, of costs that are a little higher for a little less. The system doesn't announce that it's breaking. It just performs slightly worse every year until one day you realize that the country you live in now is functionally different from the country you grew up in. And you can't point to the day it changed because there wasn't one. Here's what I want you to take from this. Not fear, not paralysis, but a specific kind of clarity. The infrastructure around you is not as reliable as it was 10 years ago. The healthcare system serving your community is not as accessible as it was 20 years ago. The fiscal capacity of the government closest to you, the one that fills the potholes and runs the water treatment plant and keeps the library open, is under more structural stress than it has been in decades. None of that is going to be fixed by the next election cycle. All of it is being managed by people who can see the math as clearly as you can now, and who are choosing from a menu of inadequate options, because the adequate ones require political will that hasn't materialized. What you can control is your margin, your physical margin, the water system redundancy, the food buffer, the medical preparedness that doesn't assume the infrastructure will perform perfectly when you need it, your financial margin, the debt structure and cash position that lets you absorb a service failure or a healthcare cost that the system doesn't cover the way it used to, your community margin, the relationships with neighbors and local institutions that create resilience at the scale that actually matters when the larger systems underperform. None of that is survivalism. All of it is what previous generations of Americans called prudence. The quiet, undramatic recognition that systems fail, that the failure is usually visible in advance, and that the people who do best are the ones who stopped waiting for someone else to fix the problem before it affected them. If this video gave you language for the feeling you've had but couldn't name, that low-frequency hum of something being wrong, hit the like button. Not for me. For the next person who is living inside the same system, feeling the same thing, and wondering if they're imagining it, they're not imagining it, this video is the confirmation. Subscribe, because next week I'm covering the specific federal formula, written in 1983 and never meaningfully updated, that determines Medicare reimbursement rates for rural hospitals, and why that single policy document has done more to reshape the geography of American healthcare than any reform passed in the last 30 years. That video is called The Formula That Closes Hospitals. If you live more than 20 miles from the nearest hospital, it is directly about the system keeping that hospital open. Subscribe before it publishes. And tell me in the comments, what is the one piece of infrastructure or public service in your area that you've watched degrade over the last 10 years without anyone in charge treating it as an emergency? The road, the hospital, the school, the water pressure, the response time. Name it. Your answer is the documentation this conversation needs, and I read every single one.